On today's show, we talk about the future. Ford Motor Company's futurist Sheryl Connelly joins me to dive into a new trends report released today. And to be clear, this conversation is not just about cars and trucks. The shifts that were brought by the pandemic have impacted what people buy and how people shop, and it looks like a number of those changes will be here to stay. And there are societal changes to take a look at, too. I'm Jer Stays, and welcome to your Daily Detroit for Monday, December 14th, 2020. We'll unpack it all after a quick reminder that we're powered by our members at patreon.com/dailydetroit. It's your support that allows us to have in-depth coverage like this that not only tells us what's happening in Metro Detroit, but why it's happening. So join us, patreon.com/dailydetroit. Joining me on the line is Sheryl Connelly. She has served as Ford Motor Company's futurist for more than a decade. Welcome to Daily Detroit.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Of course. And the term futurist, makes you think of someone who actually goes into the future, but you're more thinking about the future. What does a futurist do, and why is it important to a company like Ford?
So I love this question because I get it almost daily about what exactly does a futurist do? And I think Henry Ford is a really great example. He once said if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. And that dilemma still exists today because it takes 2, 3, 4 years to develop a new vehicle and get it out to the road. And so if I said to you, what can I do to make your life easier 2 years from now, 3 years, 4 years? If you're like me, you're going to say, I don't know what's going to make my life easier 2 months from now, 2 weeks from now. And so it's incumbent on innovators to imagine a future that no one else has yet to imagine. And my job is to try to help with that discussion. I track global trends in social, tech, economic, environmental, and political arenas. And while we'll never be able to predict the future, we can look to those signals to see what are the influences, the forces that will shape consumer values. And can we start to anticipate what we might do to better serve consumers and the unknown?
There's a new 2021 Ford Trends report. And one of the things I noticed about this, I think a lot of people make the mistake of asking people what products they want or what specific things. This Trends report, which is a global survey looking at how families and individuals are looking at the pandemic, how they're dealing with changing rules in the workplace and their family and their friends. You're looking at trends of how people are approaching the world. You're not necessarily asking, what kind of SUV you would like to buy.
That's a really good point. I tell people I'm not the traditional car employee. I work alongside people that are car enthusiasts. They have oil that runs through their veins. They're adrenaline junkies. They're gearheads. I've always been interested in the people side of the equation. And so what we're trying to do is understand the macro things, the forces that are happening in the world. So by design, I look outside the auto industry and I leave the automotive insights to the people who are closest to the product, the designers, the engineers, the enthusiasts, marketers.
So there are a few key points in here that I want to get to because I think they're learning opportunities for all of us, right? This isn't just about cars. It's useful for the automotive industry, but I think all of us can get things out of it. One of the first things, and this one I think seems pretty self-evident, but it's interesting to see numbers and things like that anxiety is high and there is a lot of fear of getting and contracting COVID-19 and the impact on communities. I think this is also kind of borne out in some of the purchase data and people going out and that kind of stuff.
It is remarkable what 2020 has provided to the world. It has caught everybody off guard, flat-footed. And the real question is it has changed life as we know it, but how long will it last? Will these changes, the impact on our daily behavior, our attitudes, will they be enduring? Will they stay? Or, as there's hope of a vaccine on the horizon, can we expect things to go back to normal? No, this survey was fielded in a period between late October and early November. So we have this moment in time when we were asking people. But what we saw in our survey, like you said, 14 countries around the world, almost 70% said they were overwhelmed by changes taking place in the world. The majority of people that we spoke to said just looking at the news, they found to be extremely stressful. And yet, at the same time, there's lots of reasons for hope and optimism because 53% of the people we surveyed said actually adapting to the changes brought on by the pandemic were easier than I had imagined.
Really? That is interesting. That is interesting. It's funny how sometimes change comes and you get really worried about it at first, but once you start to get into like the routine of things, humans are extremely adaptable.
They are adaptable and we're resilient. I don't want to diminish the suffering because there has been widespread suffering and loss. But for many people, what they have found is that if you can adapt, it will make the difference between fragility and resilience. And I love the way that people are looking for new ways to deal with this. So, for instance, one of the things that we found in our research is that the country of Norway did a program just to keep kids calm in the early days of COVID. So the Norwegian Prime Minister actually held a kids-only press conference to answer questions about the pandemic, telling kids it's okay to be scared and giving them a platform to kind of have their concerns heard and addressed. In the U.S., we have seen the increase of people that are downloading the mental wellness apps have soared during the pandemic. And fortunately, if you're a Lincoln customer, we recently partnered with Calm, which is a leading meditation and mindfulness app, and we offer it as a complimentary part of the premium membership to our service. And I think that these things about recognizing that mental health is so important, finding ways to deal with this unprecedented period and all of the uncertainty. I know in the early days, I remember thinking to myself, we're all in this together. Like, this might be overwhelming, but everyone's experiencing it as a collective.
Yeah. You're talking about taking care of yourself, kind of the Calm app. One thing I thought was interesting was that more than 1 in 4 adults globally say that they use their vehicle to relax, and 1 in 5 say they use it for privacy. At first I was like, well, wait a second. Because a lot of times I look at like a car as transportation. But then I started putting myself in the shoes of someone. Let's say I have a few kids. Let's say I have a really busy household. The inside of my car might be the only place I can think to myself.
It is interesting with the way that we think about how we use our car. Last year we did in our trend report, we started to track loneliness. And loneliness, the numbers are epidemic. It's really quite alarming. 62% of the young people that we would call Generation Z, complain of experiencing loneliness on a weekly basis. If you were older, though, the baby boomers did not experience it to the same degree, about 29%. Now, since the advent of COVID, the numbers have all increased, but they've increased more for the older generation. So now they're up to 36%. And it's funny that we think about our cars, and our cars were a place of community in ways that we didn't expect. For instance, more than half the people we spoke to last year said that some of their best conversations take place on the road or during long car rides. 46% said they use their commute time to catch up with friends and family. And so for a lot of people, that thing has changed, like that car as being this place of community. And so it's morphing into something different about using your vehicle as a place to work or a place to get privacy, even a place to hide. We have a large number of people, large, I mean like 5-7% worldwide saying, yeah, I returned to my car to find a little bit of refuge away from everything around me.
One thing that I noticed when I talk to people, they say a lot of trends that may have happened 5 or 10 years out, they've been accelerated by this pandemic. What do you think of that?
The working from home, I think, is the perfect example of that. I mean, work from home has really changed the landscape of the day-to-day experience. I mean, many Ford employees that live in Metro Detroit have been working from home since the middle of March, and we will not look to return to campus until next summer. And so it's been changing. I can speak to my own experience anecdotally. I work harder. My days are longer. My calendar has never been more full. But I still find that I have more free time, which seems really counterintuitive, right? You're like, well, wait a minute. If your hours are longer, how is it they have more time? Because I estimate that I lost about 15 hours a week getting to and from and preparing for work on a daily basis. The balance has been really good. I think there are some people who are saying, yeah, this suits me. This suits my lifestyle. And when things return to some sort of normalcy, is there really a need to return to the same framework of reporting to the office every single day?
What does your gut say about that? Because I've done a series of interviews over the last few months, and it kind of goes into 2 camps. There's one camp of people that's like, oh, we're going to return back. You talk to some business owners like, oh, we got to come back. And then you got another side of folks who say, this is kind of the way going forward of having this mix of work from home and the office. What is your gut saying? Because, I mean, that's a pretty long time that you said that Ford employees are going to be working remotely. Do you think work from home is now going to be a permanent mix? And is this going to affect the kinds of space and things that people are going to need?
Absolutely. I think offices around the world are reconsidering how to map out their space. Ford was going through its own campus transformation, coincidentally, before this all started. And so I think they're being very careful about it. And it's not just about how many people will return to work, but when they do return to work, how do you create a space that's still safe? How do you create a space that still allows for social distancing? The protocol that Ford's put together in terms of those people who do have to come into the office, I think has been really rigorous. And in fact, we shared our playbook for bringing people back to work and made it available to everybody publicly so they can learn from it. And I think there are some really good things there. But on the other side, there are people, that are saying, hey, I can work from my cabin up north, or I can work from Florida. I can work from a different location. I can work living in my elderly parents' house so that I can make sure I'm keeping an eye on them. And so I think in many ways it's given people more choice than what we've seen happening before. Now, there are those, though, who say, no, I like to be with my colleagues. I get a lot of energy, and I do miss that. I think there's something about the energy you feel when you're surrounded by your colleagues and you're deep into conversation and all the ideas are flowing. In my personal experience, that's easier to achieve when I'm face-to-face with people as opposed to doing it via camera on my laptop. But it's not impossible. Fortunately, I work with some really creative, innovative people that have made this transition to being online relatively seamless.
So I want to get into something that's frankly a heavy topic, and that's inequality, because that is a real thing, and it has shown its ugly head in so many ways in this pandemic. And related to that, there's some data in here that I kind of want you to unpack around basically that consumers are more aware of this divide and that they basically expect brands to take a stand on social issues. And I used to work in like the marketing and corporate comm world for a while. And one of the things I think a lot of brands are afraid, not necessarily where I was, but a lot of brands are worried about is basically cleaving their audience or offending them or saying something too strong. But your data is kind of showing a little bit otherwise, especially when it comes to social issues.
Yes. But to your point, there has long been a spotlight on inequality and equity, but it's certainly intensified in this past year. We started tracking this trend 3 years ago when we call it minding the gap, pressing the inequality gaps around the world and trying to say, like, as awareness gets raised and there's this call for greater social justice, the solutions are going to take multiple stakeholders. And as you pointed out, when you think about the pandemic, it had a disproportionate impact on low-income communities, ethnic minorities, and women. And so consumers are becoming more aware of this divide, and they want brands to step in to do their part. And I think that's really important. We call it sometimes call to stand. We talked about it even last year in our trend book, that if a company doesn't align with their values, 42% of Americans say that they've boycotted a brand because they didn't support what they stood for. And if you don't agree with the brand, sometimes, those people will actively dissuade. 40% of the people we surveyed said they try to dissuade their friends and family from doing business with companies that they don't like. One of my colleagues said, at times like this, companies need to know exactly where they stand before they're called to stand. And to me, the example that I turn to is the one of Bill Ford. As the country in recent years decided to move away from the Paris Accord and put that on the back burner, as a longtime environmentalist, he said, no, the company has to continue to design more fuel-efficient vehicles. He has great passion for the automotive industry, but he has equal passion for the environment. And he spent 40 years of his career trying to reconcile those two things. And so when he said, we're still going to move forward on that, we're going to try to design to that. And he's also working closely with California to try to make sure that we address all the issues surrounding it. And I think, that might not be all of the things that trigger a new purchase, but I do think it becomes a pride point for those people who are in tune to that. But for other people, it might be things like social justice. And Ford's done a lot of great work in that area, particularly here in Metro Detroit. We see things that we've done with the African American community. So Black Americans make up more than 13% of the U.S. population, but only 5% of the lawyers. And so to address this gap, Ford's developed the Ford Law Career Academy, and it's done in partnership with Ford Motor Company Fund and the Henry Ford Learning Institute. But it helps equip young Black students with the resources and networking needed to succeed in the field of law. And that could be anywhere from coaching, mentoring, or even internship.
That's so interesting to me because, first off, that sounds like a wonderful program. And I think it's very important to have that hand up, not just a hand out, but a hand up. I think that's a good thing. But the other thing I think about is, especially as an online content creator myself, what I've learned is that when people don't agree with you, they tell you that you should stop being political or you should stop taking a stand with things. And what this is kind of telling me with this anecdote and this data is that it's not just that companies all of a sudden have like become more aware, but I think they know that there's an active push that as much as you have some people online saying you shouldn't take a stand, that the people on the ground, the consumers, are saying you should.
Absolutely. Our research showed that 72% of men worldwide say companies have a responsibility to address social justice. The number's slightly higher for women at 76%. And it seems to be working because those same people that were surveyed, 3/4 of them agree that brands today are trying to do the right thing.
That is interesting because I think in the online conversation, a lot of times it gets distorted by the people who are very loud, but that doesn't mean that they're the majority opinion.
Absolutely. I think when large companies take a stand on stuff like this, it's newsworthy and people take notice. I mean, it was just a few weeks ago that JP Morgan made a pledge towards racial equality, and they announced that they would spend $30 billion over the next 5 years to help close the racial wealth gap. That is the biggest monetary commitment any company's ever made in that arena.
Let's keep moving here. I think this is important because I know a lot of people who are either retailers or they're involved in local commerce, all kinds of things. There's been something that has shifted when it comes to how people buy. And a data point here says that 41% say that they do not want to go back to the way that they shopped before the pandemic. And that is a stunning number to me. That tells me that we're not going to snap back to how things were January 1st, 2019.
This is probably the arena where COVID has ushered in more changes than any other part. It has been dramatic in the manner in which we shop, whether it's purchasing goods in bulk or buying online, how we buy, what we seek to buy, it's all transformed. And as we say goodbye to some of the old rules of retail and service, companies have been surprisingly adaptive. There's still some people that are nostalgic. Our same survey said 51% of the people we spoke to said it's a luxury to go shopping in a physical store. That number is up 8 percentage points from the last time we asked it 3 years ago. But the way that customer service has improved, the nimbleness in which they're handling deliveries, the curbside pickup, grocery shopping has been fundamentally changed. These things, I don't know that I personally would ever want to go back to the way that things used to be.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, this next one is interesting because it's about how people have changed how they're moving around. And I know that there's been a long time kind of tension between like the cars versus walking and biking. There tends to be this tension, but the data is showing that both bike sales have soared and car sales have boomed at the same time. What's behind that shift? And then you also get into autonomous vehicles, which seems to be this thing that every time I talk to folks, autonomous vehicles are coming, and then like they're coming, and then they're coming. And when are they going to be here?
Yes, it has definitely been a shift. And of course, that's driven by health and safety concerns. People are looking to control their environment to whatever extent possible. And so you see more and more people moving away from the public forms of transportation. So because of the pandemic, people told us from around the world, 52% said that they're less likely to take a subway, to ride a bus, or take the metro. 50% less likely to take a train. 58% are less likely to travel by airplane. 47% are less likely to use ride sharing or a taxi. And so I think the flip side of that is it's forcing us to new modes of transportation. So bike sales are up, the scooters are out there, the used car sales went up, and we do see more and more people interested in having their own personal vehicle so that they can control it. And I think we know that for many people, it's become indispensable. I mean, 3/4 of the people that we spoke to said they can't imagine a life without having their own vehicle.
Interesting. And then when it gets to autonomous driving, that's kind of looking down the road. I know that there's still a lot of work and development with that because that's not on the road widespread yet. So let's talk about that autonomous side and how people feel about it, and are they excited about it?
This is something we've looked at for a very long time. So we asked the survey question, am I hopeful about the future of autonomous vehicles? And people have to, the number of people that agree. Now, if we look at the global numbers, the younger generations, Generation Z, millennials, in other words, people under 40 come in at about 3 out of 4.
Wow.
If you get down over to the baby boomer generation, it's about 50%. But this doesn't even speak to the variance by geography. If I look to the United States, and it's aligned, but it's a little bit down, 73% for Generation Z say, yes, I'm excited. 52 say that they're hopeful about it. But you compare that to China, the numbers are much higher. So baby boomers is 79%. Gen Xers, the number's 92%. Likewise, I think India is another country that's very high historically, with Gen Xers 88%. And we don't know exactly why, but we have speculation, we have theories. I mean, these are the countries that are most densely populated. They have perhaps oftentimes the most arduous congestion and commute issues that they're dealing with. You know, regardless of age, regardless of region, people universally tell us that they would rather their child ride in a self-driving vehicle than ride with a stranger.
Really?
It was 75%. So it's 3/4 of the people we spoke to. So there is something deep down in terms of instinct, you know, in terms of how you protect your loved ones. And people go, yeah, like autonomous vehicle, I would much rather have my child by themselves than being with somebody I don't know.
That is interesting, to trust the autonomous driving versus like another human being. That is fascinating.
Yeah. And that number is actually up from previous years. I think it was like 67% the last time we asked that. So in recent years, more and more people are interested in that option.
Well, and so much of buying patterns and consumerism does tap into instincts, doesn't it?
It does. One of my favorite authors and researchers is a man named Daniel Ariely. He's written many books. His first was called Predictably Irrational. And we are not always rational. And, you know, we think that our decisions are guided by reason, but we really follow our instincts. And then when we follow our instincts, we tend to post-rationalize how we did it. So I think there's something in here about just our notions about what is in the best interest of our children.
Well, I think that comment about instincts and like that justification afterward, I think that's so important to understand, whether you're talking about consumer habits, politics. Like, there is just a way that humans tick. You've got your logic people, and I have some dear friends that are truly like almost stoic logic people. They're wonderful people, but they're not the majority. I mean, the majority look at something and they go, how do I feel? And then they go back and say, all right, what are my justifications for this? They may not say that in their head as clearly, but it's one of those things of like, well, I feel this way, I want to do this. And then, oh, here's all the data that backs up what I want to do.
Yes. How do I justify my feelings? I think you're absolutely right. You know, and your question about like, when can we expect an autonomous vehicle? I think we're getting closer. You know, I can't put a pin in the date, but in August, Bill Ford and key Michigan officials partnered to announce the first of its kind connected and autonomous vehicle corridor. And it's designed to improve transportation across Southeast Michigan. And hopefully it will continue the state's leadership in smart infrastructure and future mobility.
That's the Kalamazoo project, right?
Yes, the Corktown project. It's all very exciting. Yes, and the Cav corridor, it's, I think, really speaks to the legacy of Detroit being a motor city.
For sure. One thing I am glad, though, is you didn't say it was 5 years out. Because like the running gag is with like experts, well, they'll say, well, it's 5 years out. Everything is 5 years out. No matter what it is, it's 5 years out. Exactly 5 years.
I can appreciate the optimism, you know, but the leaders of Ford have said it's not a race. It's about getting it right. You know, I grew up on watching reruns of the Jetsons. And so I can appreciate it. I'm like, where's my flying car? Where's my Rosie the robot, you know, home assistant? And those things never quite materialized the way that we thought it would. But I do believe that we will see an autonomous future. I think that the business case for it, if for no other reason, the aging population, keeping them mobile, giving them the freedom and independence to choose where they live, when they move about, how they move about, I think that is an extraordinary business case to make this happen.
Well, then finally, something that I remember like very fondly at the beginning of this pandemic, there was this whole story after story about this silver lining of less pollution. And like, you know, you could see animals swimming through the watery streets of Venice and the fog pictures and all of that, like the lack of smog and that. It was a really beautiful thing. And then, I don't know, maybe a month later, I can't exactly point it, but it felt like, oh, back to the kind of situation we had before when it comes to the environment and things like that, as people changed back their habits. Can you talk a bit about sustainability before we head out the door here?
Sure. This is a topic that's near and dear to Ford. As I said, Bill Ford has been setting the goals for the company in this regard for a very long time. And I think he, like everyone else, they were like, oh, look at the great air quality. This is perhaps the silver lining. And everyone was desperate to find a silver lining in the early days of the lockdown. But then you started to go, wait, I can't bring my reusable bags to the grocery store anymore. I'm ordering a lot of carry out, the restricted resources that I have. I'm using these masks that should only be used once a time. People were turning to gloves, those little containers filled with hand sanitizer. So we found ourselves increasingly dependent on plastics and other disposables. Like, for instance, just last year, 78% of the people we surveyed said they were actively changing their behavior to fight against climate change. That's a huge number. The number dropped to 71%. So 7 percentage points. And I think the reasons are obvious. But it's interesting because last year we dug a little bit deeper. And while you have, this large number, 78% saying I'm actively working to fight climate change, we found that when you dug a little deeper, only 48% of Americans were willing to embrace sustainable initiatives if the inconvenience to them was small or non-existent.
Wow.
So it's easy to say, I'm going to refuse that straw. I'm going to, carry my reusable cup with me. But I think the hard decisions, people are a little bit more reticent to make. And that's an area where I think Ford can really kind of change part of the conversation with electric vehicles. 40% of the men that we spoke to last year said they didn't fully understand the benefits of electric vehicles. So it wasn't that surprising that 36% said they weren't sure they were ever interested in buying one. The numbers are similar for women too, a little bit higher. And so I think it's incumbent to help people really understand. Companies like Ford have to help people understand the benefits of it. And I think for many people, they just look at an electric vehicle as some sort of trade-off. It might be green, but I give up the thrill of driving. And so last year when we launched the new all-electric Ford Mustang Mach-E, it wasn't just eco-friendly, it was being positioned under the legacy of our iconic vehicle, the Mustang. And so it told people that you can still have a sleek, beautiful design, advanced technology, extraordinary performance, but also have zero emissions. I mean, more simply put, you can have mileage with muscle.
Right. I mean, I've driven a variety of electric cars and hybrids, and I'll tell you this, especially with the electric cars, I don't know if you've ever been one that's tuned for any sort of performance. It is like driving a rocket ship. I swear, the torque on that thing and the feeling that you get in your chest when you hit that pedal is intense. And until you've experienced it, you don't know what you're in for. If you're worried about electric not being able to give you power, depending on what model you're talking about, it beats the pants off a gas engine for that kind of pickup, if it's tuned for the right thing.
Well, I couldn't have asked for a better testimonial. And of course, it's not going to just come down to the vehicles. I mean, we have to set other goals. I mean, Ford is looking long term. By 2050, our sustainability goal is to become carbon neutral, using 100% locally sourced renewable energies for all of our manufacturing plants by the year 2035, and then eliminating single-use plastics from our operations by 2030. And so we think, you have to think about this and the complexity of what are all the points that we can try to hit to tackle these issues, because that's the only way we will hit what's needed in terms of demands to slow climate change.
Interesting. Well, I really appreciate your time, Sheryl Connelly. This has been a really fascinating conversation. I didn't expect it to go in all these places, but I'm kind of glad it did.
Me too. And if you or your listeners want to learn more, delve even deeper, all of this information I talked about is available online through FordTrends.com.
Well, and I know that there's going to be some nerds who file through all of that stuff because my audience is wonderfully nerdy and I love them for it. Sheryl Connelly, Manager, Global Consumer Trends and Futuring, Ford Motor Company. Thank you so much for your time today on Daily Detroit.
Thanks for having me.
Before I let you go, here are a couple things to know today. Michigan-based TCF Bank and Ohio-based Huntington Bank are merging as part of a $22 billion deal. This will mean that some local customers have had their bank change names a few times over the last few years. I mean, does anyone remember Tolmer Bank? I do. Anyway, as part of this regional consolidation plan, there will be two headquarters, one in Columbus for consumer banking and one here in Detroit for commercial lending. One expert I reached out to, Eric Gordon from U of M's Ross Business School, tells me that this all is cyclical. When regulatory requirements go up, it pays to spread the costs over a bigger bank. Technology pushes combinations too because it reduces operating costs and improves customer satisfaction. But that work costs a lot of money. while smaller banks can't afford the latest and greatest. But smaller banks often pop up again as big banks do not always serve smaller communities well. This has a couple of knock-on local development impacts too. The under-construction headquarters TCF has been building in downtown Detroit will now be exclusively for bank employees instead of offering some leased space. And the former Cobo Center that just became the TCF Center, well, it's going to get yet another new name that is yet to be announced. I will note here, though, that there's already a Huntington Center in Toledo, Ohio. Now, from a number of people I have talked to on background, whatever public relations people for a company say, these sorts of deals, there's sort of a shared skepticism of promises when it comes to jobs and charitable support. The track record is that it rarely ever is the same for a home city after a merger, as that energy focuses toward the headquarters, and here there will be two, so that energy may be split. And finally, under the escort of U.S. Marshals, truckfuls of coronavirus vaccines started rolling out of the Michigan Pfizer facility in Kalamazoo over the weekend, destined for all 50 states. As of this recording on Monday, we can confirm that doses are being administered across the country. It provides a light at the end of the tunnel while we're in what public health officials describe as a dark time, with skyrocketing deaths and infections after many people ignored pleas to not gather between households over the holidays. For perspective, this vaccine comes as COVID-19 nationally crosses the milestone of killing more than 300,000 Americans, or 2.5 Kalamazoos, with 16 million sick in the United States, or more than 216 Kalamazoos. Thanks to Cheyenne Nocerini for her help behind the scenes on this episode. A quick reminder that if you find what we're doing valuable, there are 3 quick ways to support us. Any of them you can do is awesome. First, tell a friend we're here. The more, the merrier. Second, leave a review on Apple Podcasts so when people find us, they see others supporting the show. And third, if it's something you can do, become a member at patreon.com/dailydetroit. We have a book giveaway on Tuesday. We're raffling off a copy of Mickey Lyon's Wicked Detroit. It's a great read. Well, I'm Jer Stays. Take care of each other, and I'll see you around Detroit. Talk tomorrow.